I'll pay for it. This is my money, not the store's.
Grove Mart on Delmar Avenue was busy Saturday afternoon. Long lines, tired people, everyone just trying to get home. A man stood at Register 3. Simple clothes, worn jacket, a small basket of groceries, cornmeal, dried beans, cooking oil, a loaf of bread. Basic things. Survival things. He reached into his pocket. Then he reached again. "I'm sorry," he said to the cashier. "I think I left my wallet at home." The woman behind him in the red blazer exploded. "Are you serious right now? Some of us have places to be. Move out of the way." The store manager rushed over. "Sir, if you can't pay, you need to step aside." Everyone was staring. Everyone was judging. And then the cashier did something no one expected. She reached into her Grove Mart apron, pulled out a folded $20 bill, her lunch money, and her only cash until Friday, and she paid for his groceries. And the man looked at her, and what he did next made the whole store go silent. "My name is Eldridge Fountain. I am the founder and chairman of Fountain Group. I own this building. Now, before I tell you what happened next, check that subscribe button. If you love stories where the humble rise and the proud fall, hit it right now and turn on notifications. Because the payback in this story, it is going to be legendary." Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Eldridge Fountain had spent 30 years building an empire, and one Saturday afternoon in a neighborhood grocery store would change his life forever. But let me tell you about the man first. At 58 years old, Eldridge was the founder and chairman of Fountain Group, a real estate and construction conglomerate worth $2.8 billion. His fingerprints were on half the mixed-income housing developments in Atlanta, but you would never know it by looking at him. No flashy watches, no designer labels for grocery runs, no entourage following him through the parking lot. He wore simple clothes, drove himself, carried his own bags. A man who needs the world to see his wealth has run out of other things to show. That was his father Clarence talking, a man who poured concrete in the Atlanta summer heat and never once complained about it. Clarence Fountain was the hardest working man Eldridge ever knew. Quiet hands, scarred knuckles, and a way of saying things that Eldridge only fully understood years after the man was gone. "Son, and you can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them." His mother Loretta ran the books for their small contracting business at the kitchen table after dinner. She could read a balance sheet and read a person with the same speed and the same accuracy. "Watch how people act when they think no one important is watching," she told Eldridge when he was 14. "That is the only version of them that's real." Those words became his compass. They carried him through the struggle of building something from nothing in a city that didn't know his name, through the betrayals, through the business partners who smiled at his face and stole from his back, through the women who loved his portfolio more than his presence. By 58, Eldridge Fountain had everything except the one thing he actually wanted. Not a trophy. Not a companion who had done the math on his net worth before their second date. A partner, someone who would love the man who used to pour concrete, not the man who now owned the buildings. He had tried. God knows he had tried. 3 serious relationships in 15 years, and each one ended the same way. Vanessa had come first. Smart, polished, the kind of woman who made a room reorganize itself around her presence. Eldridge had believed in her completely, which is the only way he knew how to believe in anything. When Fountain Group hit a brutal stretch, a commercial contract that fell through and took 14 months of cash flow with it, Vanessa was gone inside 6 weeks. "I didn't sign up for uncertainty, Eldridge. Call me when things stabilize." Things stabilized. She called. He had already changed his number. Now, Monique lasted longer. Nearly 3 years, warm enough that Eldridge had let himself stop watching. The discovery came through his CFO. $380,000 moved in increments small enough to avoid automated flags, routed through a vendor account Monique had quietly set up 18 months into the relationship. When confronted, she didn't apologize. She explained, "You have more than you can spend. You didn't even notice." He noticed. He always noticed. He had simply trusted her enough to look away. Brianna was the one that cost him the most, not in money, but in the particular kind of hope that is hard to rebuild once it goes. She had seemed like the correction, humble, present, a woman who seemed genuinely unimpressed by the square footage of his life. His attorney found the paperwork by accident while pulling documents for an unrelated matter. A prenuptial agreement Brianna had been drafting privately with her own lawyer for 4 months. He had not proposed. She had already planned the exit. The clause she had written guaranteed her $40 million if the marriage dissolved within 5 years. She was engineering a departure before the arrival. After Brianna, Eldridge stopped, not dramatically, not with grief he showed anyone. He simply redirected everything that had been available for a relationship back into the work, into the Fountain Group Foundation, into the affordable housing projects that his father Clarence would have understood immediately and approved of without needing it explained. The work was honest. The work did not draft exit clauses. Roosevelt Tatum, Roe, 12 years behind the wheel, the kind of loyal that doesn't require acknowledgement to sustain itself, was the only person positioned to see what that decision cost. He said nothing about it, which was the right call, but Eldridge caught him watching sometimes with an expression that said everything Roe was too respectful to put into words. Then Loretta called. She was 74 and sharp as she had ever been, and she did not call to make conversation. She had dreamed about a market, she said, a woman at a small stall, nothing fancy, nothing that announced itself, just real nourishment that Eldridge kept walking past because he was looking at the wrong things. "You'll know her," Loretta said, "because she'll give you something she can't afford to lose, and she won't ask for anything back." Eldridge sat with that for 3 days. On the 4th, he called Roe and told him to clear his Saturday. He laid it out for Roe on a Friday morning over coffee at the kitchen table, the same table where Eldridge had made every significant decision of the last 20 years. The plan was simple enough that Roe's first response was a long silence, which meant he had objections he was organizing into their most effective order. No wallet, no cards, no ID, no watch worth noticing, clothes from the back of the closet, the kind of clothes a man wears when he's doing something that will get dirty, a neighborhood grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of place where nobody is performing for anybody, where people are just trying to move through their errands and get back to their lives. He wanted to see what happened when a man came up short at a register, not in theory, in a real line, or with real people who had real places to be. Roe set down his mug. "You want to go to the grocery store with no money on purpose. I want to see who helps and who judges. You own the building the grocery store is in. Nobody there knows that." Roe looked at him with the expression of a man who has long since stopped being surprised and has moved on to a more sustainable form of resignation. He had been driving Eldridge for 12 years. He had watched him buy a struggling church's parking lot and deed it back to them free of debt, watched him fire a contractor for overcharging elderly tenants by $12 a month, watched him do 100 things that made complete sense only after the fact. Roe objected to the grocery store plan the way he objected to most things, thoroughly, sensibly, and without any expectation of being listened to. And Eldridge was already thinking about what to wear. Saturday morning he pulled the olive canvas jacket from the back of the closet. It had been to job sites and inspections, and 100 early mornings when Fountain Group was still small enough that Eldridge was also the one carrying materials. The khakis were wrinkled in the particular way of clothes that have been washed too many times and folded without much attention. He looked in the mirror. A man you would not look at twice. A man you might, on a bad day, look at once and decide you already knew everything about. Roe dropped him 2 blocks from Grove Mart on Delmar Avenue and pulled into the lot to wait. The store was the way neighborhood stores are on Saturday mornings, busy without being frantic, every line backed up 3 or 4 deep, and the produce section smelling like it had just been restocked. Eldridge took a basket and moved through the aisles slowly, picking up the things his mother used to buy without deliberating: cornmeal, dried beans, cooking oil, bread. He joined the line at register 3. The cashier had short natural hair and a cross on a thin chain, and the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have learned to read a room quickly because it has mattered. The woman behind him arrived in a red blazer with her arms already moving toward crossed, a woman assembling herself into a position before she'd identified what she was positioning against. Eldridge faced forward and waited. He did not know yet what the next 10 minutes would cost either of them, or what they would find, or that he would never entirely be the same man who had walked in. He just waited. That was the whole plan. Wait, and see what people did when they thought it didn't count. Desiree Harmon had not arrived at her particular version of herself by accident. It had taken work. The right zip code, the right car in the lot, the right bag on her arm, the right way of moving through spaces that announced she was someone who did not wait and did not settle, and was certainly not to be confused with the people around her who were doing neither as well. She had built this version carefully over years, and she maintained it the way you maintain anything that requires constant upkeep, by never letting her guard down, and by making sure anyone watching understood the distinction between her and everyone else in the room. When Eldridge's pockets came up empty, she didn't pause to assess. She escalated. "You have got to be kidding me right now." Loud enough for the full line, loud enough for the registers on either side. "Some of us have been standing here for 15 minutes. You come up to a register with no money?" Eldridge said he was sorry, that he must have left his wallet at home. Desiree spoke over the apology the way you speak over something that doesn't require a response. She pulled out her phone and began relaying the situation to someone on the other end, narrating it the way people narrate things they expect to be found entertaining. The line listened. A mother with 2 children looked at the floor. A teenager shifted his weight and studied his sneakers. An elderly man in a cardigan, patient, still, watching everything, did not look away. Bernard, the store manager, materialized with the energy of a man whose entire professional life has been the management of uncomfortable moments. He approached Eldridge with an apologetic posture that was already angled toward removal. "Sir, if you're not able to complete the transaction, I'm going to need to ask you to step aside so we can keep the line moving." Nobody in the line moved. That was the thing. That was the part that would stay with Eldridge longer than anything Desiree said. A full line of people watching a man unable to pay for cornmeal and bread, and not one of them reaching for a pocket, not one of them doing the math on what it would actually cost to help. They watched with the particular passivity of people who have decided that involvement is someone else's jurisdiction. Then Camille's hand went into her apron. She didn't announce it. Didn't make a show of it. She pulled out a folded bill, smoothed it flat on the counter with her palm, and counted out the remaining coins from a small zippered pouch with the same unhurried efficiency she brought to every transaction. She bagged his groceries the way she bagged everyone's groceries, carefully, heavier items on the bottom, and handed them across the counter. "Have a good evening, sir." Desiree said something at her back. Something clipped and dismissive, the parting shot of a woman who needed the last word to feel like she'd won something. Camille did not turn around. She pulled the next customer's items toward her and kept working. The line moved forward. Register 3 continued. From the outside, the whole thing looked like it had resolved itself quietly and would be forgotten by the time everyone got to their cars. It would not be forgotten. He reached the automatic doors. Through the glass, the parking lot was bright and ordinary. Cars pulling in, a woman loading bags into a trunk, Rose Escalade idling in the far corner where he always waited. Saturday continuing as Saturdays do. Eldridge stood there for 3 full seconds. Then he turned around and walked back to register 3. The next customer was already unloading a basket. Camille was scanning items with the same steady efficiency she brought to everything. She looked up when Eldridge set his bags back on the edge of the belt and registered no particular surprise, just attention. "Why did you do that?" he asked. She looked at him directly. "Do what?" "Pay for my groceries. "You don't know me." "You needed food," she said. "I had money." "That's the whole thing." She said it the way you state something that doesn't require elaboration, because the logic is complete as it stands. He pressed. "That was your lunch money." "I've gone without lunch before." Not performing sacrifice, just reporting a fact about her life that happened to be relevant. He pressed again, and she looked at him for a moment with those steady, reading eyes, and then she said what her grandmother used to say, plainly, the way she'd have said anything. "The hand that gives is the hand that receives." I believe that. I always have. Eldridge reached into the interior pocket of the olive jacket. The pocket nobody knew was there. One call, 4 words to Roe. "Bring the portfolio now." The store continued around them for 45 seconds, ordinary and unsuspecting. Then the automatic doors opened and Roosevelt Tatum walked in, wearing the suit he reserved for occasions that required it, carrying the leather portfolio, moving through the Grove Mart on Delmar Avenue with the unhurried confidence of a man who understood exactly what was happening, even if nobody else did yet. Eldridge took his business card from the portfolio and set it on the counter. He said his full name. He said the name of Fountain Group. He said what Fountain Group had built in Atlanta over 30 years, the housing developments and the commercial properties and the community centers. And he said, without emphasis but without softening it either, that the shopping center containing this Grove Mart was among them. Then he turned to Desiree. "You judged." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. He turned to the line. "The mother," said the teenager, the people who had watched and calculated and waited. "You watched," he turned to Camille, "and you gave me everything you had." The store came apart, not in chaos, in the best possible way, the way a room comes apart when something true has been said out loud in it. Mr. Eugene Presley, the elderly man in the cardigan who had been patient and still through all of it, and had not looked away once, brought his hands together first, slowly, deliberately, with the full weight of what he had witnessed behind it. Then the mother, then the teenager, then the whole store. Desiree stood in the center of it as the color left her face in a slow, quiet tide, and the applause went on around her, and there was nowhere to go and nothing left to perform. 3 people in the line had their phones out before Roe reached the entrance. The footage was unsteady in places, shot from different angles by people who hadn't coordinated but had all independently made the same decision at the same moment, that what they were watching was something that needed to be saved. By the time Roe pulled the Escalade out of the Grove Mart lot, the first version was already posted. By Saturday evening there were 4 more, spliced and trimmed and titled by strangers who understood instinctively what the moment contained. By Sunday morning the thing had a life of its own, a thumbnail that led with Desiree's face mid-performance, a title that didn't require exaggeration because the facts were already sufficient. And a view count that was climbing in the way. View counts climb when a video finds the precise intersection of outrage and satisfaction that the internet moves toward like water finding a drain. Desiree's exact words, her exact face, the arms crossed, the phone call, the performance she had delivered for an audience she believed was on her side, reproduced and distributed to every person who had ever stood in a line next to someone exactly like her and absorbed it in silence and said nothing and gone home still carrying it. Her employer's communications team convened an emergency call Sunday afternoon. They used words like brand alignment and values consistency and public perception, and what they meant was that her face was now a liability, and they had done the arithmetic quickly. On 8 years of regional management ended in a Monday morning meeting with HR present, a prepared statement she was asked to sign, and a box for her personal items that someone had already placed outside her office door. The leased BMW was repossessed inside 3 weeks. Tiffany Graves texted that she needed space to process everything. The rest of the social circle processed in the same direction, with the same speed, demonstrating with precision how much of what Desiree had taken for loyalty had actually been proximity to a lifestyle that no longer existed. She posted an apology video on a Wednesday. Tears, context, explanation, the architecture of public remorse assembled carefully and presented with evident effort. It received the specific, a merciless response reserved for apologies that arrive after consequences rather than before them. The comments understood the sequence. They were not interested in the video. Within 6 weeks, Desiree was submitting job applications in a city where the first result when you searched her name was not her LinkedIn profile and would not be for a very long time. The story pauses here because it would be dishonest not to. It would be easy to let this be the satisfying part, the fall, the accounting, the visible proof that what goes around completes its circuit. But that is not what this story is about. Desiree's fall is not the point. The point is what was quietly being built while everyone was watching her come apart. And that part is still ahead. He asked her before she'd finished closing out her register. She looked up with those same steady eyes and told him she had a second job starting in 90 minutes. Office building on Peachtree, cleaning crew. She was usually there until 11. Tomorrow, double shift. She thought about it the way she thought about everything practically, checking the actual calendar of her life against the request. Her next day off was Friday. Friday, he said. Name the place. She named a diner on Delmar 2 blocks from the store. Nothing fancy, she said, but the coffee was decent and the owner knew her by name. He said that sounded exactly right. He arrived Friday in the Buick, alone. No row. A plain blue shirt with nothing to announce. She was already in the corner booth when he walked in, wearing a burgundy wrap dress she had clearly pressed carefully. The kind of outfit that had been made to serve every occasion that required something better than a work uniform. She wore it with the ease of someone who had long since stopped apologizing for having one good thing and using it fully. They talked for 3 hours. She told him about her parents, her father's laugh, her mother's cooking, the specific quality of the life they had built together in a 2-bedroom house off Campbellton Road. She told him about the phone call 4 years ago, the one that came while she was on her lunch break at the office where she cleaned, the officer's voice careful and flat, the I-20 accident, the before and the after that the call had permanently installed between 2 halves of her life. She told him about the 1.5 years that followed, the legal battle to get Malik out of their aunt's house in Memphis, the custody paperwork, the lawyer she couldn't fully afford, the particular exhaustion of fighting a bureaucratic system for a child who was depending on her to win. He told her about Clarence, about watching his father pour concrete in the Atlanta summer heat with the focused patience of a man who understood that the work itself was the point, not what came after it. About Loretta at the kitchen table after dinner, running the books for their small contracting business with a pencil and a ledger, never complaining, never asking for acknowledgement. See, about the first building he bought at 31, a distressed property off Memorial Drive that nobody else wanted, and how he had sat alone in the empty parking lot afterward with the keys in his hand and wept quietly because there was no one to call who would have understood what it meant. Then he told her the truth. He hadn't forgotten his wallet. She looked at him across the table with those reading eyes and said quietly, "I know. I figured it out when you reached into that inside pocket. The wallet pocket worked fine. He waited for the anger. It didn't come. People who've been hurt test things before they trust them," she said. "I understand that. The only honest answer to a test is to just be yourself." She said it without performance, without positioning it as wisdom, just a thing she knew that happened to apply. Eldridge sat across from a woman who had understood his loneliness before he'd located the words for it. Outside, Delmar Avenue continued in the early evening light. Inside, in a corner booth over coffee that was exactly as decent as advertised, something real and unhurried quietly began. He didn't bring it up until the 4th Friday. By then, they had established a rhythm, the same diner, the same booth, the same coffee that neither of them had upgraded to something better because the point was never the coffee. He waited until she had finished telling him about her accounting professor's feedback on her final project, the way her eyes changed when she talked about the work, the particular aliveness that came into her face when the numbers were doing what she'd asked them to do. Then he said he wanted to talk about 3 things. She set down her mug and gave him the look she gave things that required her full assessment. He had come to recognize it. It meant she was listening with everything. The first was her tuition. 2 semesters remaining, and he wanted to cover them. She started to object before he finished the sentence. She was managing. She had a plan she didn't need, and he held up one hand, not to silence her, but to ask for 30 more seconds. "I don't give money," he said. "I invest it. This is a loan, terms set entirely by you. Pay me back when the firm is profitable. If that's 10 years from now, it's 10 years. If it's 20, it's 20. The only condition is that you finish." She sat with it long enough that he knew she was running the actual numbers, checking the actual logic, not just feeling her way toward yes or no. Finally, she nodded. Once. The way she agreed to things she had decided were reasonable. The second was Malik, a full 4-year scholarship. Any university he earned admission to, no conditions attached to Eldridge's name, no Fountain Group branding on it, no strings of any kind. His education, his path, belonging entirely to him. Camille didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked him to give her a day before he told Malik, so she could be there when he heard it. She was there. Malik sat at the kitchen table and read the letter twice, and then sat quietly for so long that Camille put her hand over his and waited. When he finally looked up, his face had done something complicated and young, and he didn't try to cover it. The third thing Eldridge had thought about longest. Not a job, not a favor. An introduction to Fountain Group's CFO, an open door into the rooms where the real decisions lived, where the numbers told the full story of a business rather than just the surface of it. "When you build your own practice," he told her, "you'll already know how it works from the inside. That's worth more than anything I could hand you." Camille graduated 7 months later at the top of her cohort. Eldridge was in the front row. Rowe sat beside him in the suit he reserved for occasions that earned it. Malik was on the other side, making no effort whatsoever to manage his composure, and everyone nearby smiled because it was the most honest thing in the room. That evening, Eldridge took her back to the diner. Same booth, same mediocre coffee. She asked him why always here, when he could take her anywhere. Duh, he told her the truth. "This is the booth where I stopped being strategic and started being honest. This is where I fell in love with you." She looked at him across the table in the early evening light and didn't say anything for a moment. She didn't need to. He already knew. He had been carrying the ring for 11 days before he found the right moment, which is to say he had been waiting for a moment that didn't feel constructed, and with Camille those moments couldn't be engineered. They had to arrive on their own. It arrived on a Friday evening in the usual booth, after the usual coffee, after she had told him about Malik's acceptance letter from Georgia Tech, full engineering program, starting in the fall, and the way he had read it standing at the kitchen counter and then walked to his room and closed the door, and she had stood in the hallway and listened to him cry quietly for 5 minutes before he came back out and asked what was for dinner like nothing had happened. She laughed, telling it. Eldridge laughed with her, and then the laughter settled into the particular, comfortable quiet that had become the texture of their time together, and he reached into his jacket pocket. The box was small. The ring inside it was not complicated. A clean gold band, well-made, commissioned from a jeweler on Auburn Avenue that Eldridge had known for 20 years. A man who understood that the best work didn't announce itself. There were no diamonds. There was no spectacle. He opened the box and set it on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. He told her to look at the inside of the band. She picked it up carefully and tilted it toward the light. The engraving read $19.84. She looked at him again, a question already forming. That number, he said, was the most significant figure in 30 years of building. More significant than the first contract, the first property, the first year Fountain Group crossed 9 figures in assets. $19.84, the exact total of his groceries at Register 3 on a Saturday afternoon. The amount a woman had given freely to a man she believed had nothing, with no audience in mind, no calculation running, no return expected. In 30 years of transactions, he had never been party to one that cost less or meant more. "It is the most valuable deal in the history of Fountain Group," he said. "And I want to carry it with me for the rest of my life." He asked her to marry him, not the developer, not the portfolio, not the man in the Escalade with the driver in the pressed suit, just Eldridge, Clarence's son, a man who had gone to a neighborhood grocery store looking for evidence that something real still existed in the world and had found it standing at a register in a Grove Mart apron. She laughed first, the kind of laugh that arrives just ahead of tears and can't quite decide which way to go. Then she reminded him, through it, that he hadn't forgotten his wallet. He said he knew. He said he'd found something worth considerably more than whatever had been in it. In a corner booth with no cameras and no audience and coffee that had never once been worth commenting on, Camille Watkins looked at Eldridge Fountain across the small table and said yes, 1,000 times. They borrowed 60 chairs from the church 2 blocks over and set them between the aisles in 2 rows facing Register 3. The shelves had been pushed back and draped. String lights ran the full length of the ceiling from the entrance to the back wall, and in the particular light they made the store look like something it had always had the capacity to be, a place where people came not just to survive, but to mark the moments that mattered. Bernard had unlocked the doors himself that Sunday evening and then stepped back and let it become something other than his store for a few hours. Loretta watched on a tablet propped against a throw pillow in her living room in southwest Atlanta, so her daughter holding it steady because Loretta's hands weren't reliable when she was crying, and she had given up trying not to cry 20 minutes before the ceremony started. When Camille appeared at the end of the actual grocery aisle, Malik at her side in a suit he had bought with his own money from his part-time job and refused any help with, Loretta said quietly, to no one in the room who could hear her, "She is the one from my dream. The small stall. The real nourishment. You finally stopped walking past it." Malik's speech earned a standing ovation from 60 people in a grocery store, and he accepted it with the composure of a young man who had decided he had earned the right to be proud and was not going to diminish it by pretending otherwise. He talked about his sister in the specific, sun-varnished way that only people who have been carried by someone can talk about them, not as a tribute but as a true account. They exchanged vows at Register 3. Camille promised to love the man who had poured concrete before he owned the buildings, and she promised to keep $19.84 somewhere on her person at all times, just in case. The 60 people laughed, and then were quiet in the way people are quiet when something has been said that is both funny and entirely true. 3 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Desiree walked into Grove Mart. The clothes were different, simpler. No performance in the fabric or the fit. She moved through the aisles carefully, checking prices, putting one thing back and choosing something smaller. She counted at the register and came up $4 short. She began to remove the bread from the belt without being asked. Camille reached into her apron and covered the difference without comment. Desiree stood at the register and stared at her. The words came out unsteady. "After everything I said to you, after everything I did, why would you help me?" Camille looked at her with the same steady eyes she brought to everything. Her answer arrived in the same tone, with the same uncomplicated warmth she had extended to a stranger in a worn jacket on a Saturday afternoon that had changed everything. "You need food. I have money. That's it." Desiree took her groceries, and something she had not carried in with her, something quiet and difficult and necessary that she would have to figure out what to do with on her own time. Camille opened Watkins Financial Services the following spring. Malik started at Georgia Tech in the fall. Roe drove Eldridge to the opening and waited outside in the Buick because some habits were worth keeping. Her first client was a small grocery store on Delmar Avenue. She never sent them an invoice. When Bernard asked how much he owed her, she told him the account was settled, that the store had already paid her in full on a Saturday afternoon when she wasn't looking. The river, at last, flowed both ways.